The glass shattered before anyone screamed. It exploded against the marble floor at the far end of the ballroom, champagne spraying like shrapnel, the sound slicing through the polite hum of conversation. Heads snapped around. A woman gasped. Somewhere a man laughed too loudly too late. And standing at the center of that sudden silence was a woman no one had noticed 5 seconds earlier. Her hands trembling. Her breath caught halfway in her chest, a thin line of champagne dripping from the cuff of her sleeve. They thought she was staff. Someone near the front hissed, "For God's sake, get her out of here," as if she were a stain, not a person. Security shifted their weight. A server froze mid-step, and at the head table Jonathan Reed did not move. He did not blink. He watched the woman as if the room had narrowed to a single point, as if something he had spent years trying not to remember had just forced its way back into the light. Her name was Sarah Miller, and she had cleaned Jonathan Reed's house for almost 7 years. The camera of the moment pulls back. Now rewinds the tape, drags us hours earlier to the quiet, just before the storm. That morning, the house on Beacon Hill was still dark when Jonathan Reed woke up. Not to an alarm, not to a phone buzzing with demands, but to the old sound in his chest, the one his cardiologist warned him about, and the one he never talked about. He sat up slowly, one hand pressed flat against his sternum, breathing through it. Outside, Boston was gray and cold, the kind of winter light that made even wealthy neighborhoods look tired. Downstairs, the kettle clicked on. Sarah moved through the kitchen with the same economy she had learned decades ago. No wasted steps. No noise where noise wasn't needed. She wore a navy sweater and sensible shoes, hair pulled back tight, hands already smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. She had arrived early like always. Not because Jonathan demanded it, because habit once built is hard to kill. She noticed the pill organizer on the counter before he said a word. It was missing one capsule. The wrong one. "You skipped the beta blocker again," she said, not looking up. Jonathan paused at the doorway. Most people never spoke to him that way. Not his attorneys, not his former partners, not the people who still called asking for advice he rarely gave anymore. "I was running late," he said. "You're retired," Sarah replied, calm, almost gentle, but firm. She slid the organizer back toward him. "Late for what?" Jonathan almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he took the pill, dry swallowed it, and leaned against the counter, as if the weight of the house itself had shifted. "You know what today is," he said. Sarah nodded. Of course she knew. She had known for weeks. Everyone in the city knew. Linda Whitman's wedding had been printed in the society pages twice already, framed as a union of legacy and influence. She did not say Linda's name. She did not need to. "You don't have to go," Sarah said. "Yes, I do," Jonathan replied. His voice was flat, but something underneath it was coiled tight. "If I don't show up, it becomes a story. If I do, it stays a spectacle. I'd rather choose the shape of the damage." Sarah turned, then really looked at him. 62 years old. Tailored jacket hanging just a little looser than it used to, eyes sharp but tired. A man who had built $4.3 million into something 10 times that, and then walked away before it ate him alive. "And you want me there," she said. It was not a question. Jonathan held her gaze. This was the moment he had rehearsed in his head all night. The phrasing, the justification, the lie that would make it easier. "I need someone who won't pretend," he said finally. "Someone who won't sell me back to myself." Sarah exhaled, slow, controlled. She thought of the ballroom full of people who would look through her, not at her. Thought of the weight of that room pressing down on her chest. Thought of every time she had been mistaken for less than she was and let it slide because pushing back cost too much. "I'm not a shield," she said quietly. "I know," Jonathan replied. That's why I'm asking. She did not answer right away. Instead, she reached for a mug, poured him coffee black, exactly how he took it, and set it down in front of him with a soft clink. The sound landed heavier than it should have. I'll go, she said, but I won't disappear to make it easier for you. Jonathan nodded once. A contract sealed without paper. What neither of them said was what else sat beneath the surface. That Linda Whitman was not just an ex, that the wedding was not just a wedding, that the people gathering that night had stakes far beyond champagne and speeches, that Sarah Miller's presence in that room would not just unsettle social expectations, it would scrape against something sharper. At the venue hours later, the Whitman estate looked like a postcard. White tents, heated walkways, valets in black coats moving with choreographed precision. Inside the ballroom glowed all crystal and warm light, every surface designed to reflect power back at itself. Conversations overlapped in low, confident tones. Deals half-made alliances reinforced with handshakes and shared laughter. Linda stood near the head table, posture perfect, smile fixed in place like armor. She had rehearsed this day down to the second. The entrances, the angles, the way Jonathan would look walking in alone, just another wealthy man aging out of relevance. Then the doors opened. Jonathan stepped inside. And beside him, Sarah. The first ripple moved through the room like a breath sucked in. Not outrage. Not yet. Confusion. Eyes tracked them. Assessed. Dismissed. Reassessed. Linda's smile did not break, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Who is that? The question passed from mouth to mouth without being spoken aloud. Sarah felt it land on her shoulders, felt the heat of it, the pressure. Her spine stiffened. She reminded herself to breathe, to walk, to let the room look. At a table near the aisle, a man in a dark suit leaned toward his wife and murmured something. She covered her mouth, eyes flicking toward Sarah, then away. Across the room, a younger woman with a political donor badge pinned to her clutch laughed softly, a sound like glass clinking together. Linda stepped forward, the practiced grace of someone who had never learned to doubt her footing. Jonathan, she said warmly, voice pitched for witnesses. You came. You invited me, he replied. Her gaze slid to Sarah, paused a fraction of a second too long. And this is Sarah felt it then, the narrowing, the calculation, the expectation that she would shrink, apologize, explain. Before Jonathan could speak, a voice cut in from behind them. Excuse me, said a man with an earpiece hand already hovering near Sarah's elbow. Staff entrance is around the side. The room leaned in. Sarah looked at the man's hand, then at his face. Then she did something no one expected. She laughed, not loud, not sharp, just a single breath of sound, surprised and human, before she straightened and met his eyes. I'm not lost, she said. The security man hesitated. Jonathan did not intervene. Linda's smile finally slipped, and somewhere in the back of the room, a guest lowered his glass slowly, recognition dawning too late as the first real crack split through the evening's polished surface. This was not going to be the wedding Linda planned, and Sarah Miller was done being invisible. The security guard's hand hovered in the air for a second too long, fingers curled as if waiting for permission from the room itself. I said, I'm not lost, Sarah repeated slower this time. Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. But it carried slicing clean through the low murmur that had started to swell again. I'm exactly where I was invited to be. A few heads turned. A few others turned away, pretending sudden fascination with floral arrangements and crystal glassware. The guard glanced toward the head table, searching for confirmation from someone who mattered more than the woman standing in front of him. His eyes landed on Jonathan, Jonathan Reed did not speak. He did not nod. He did not wave the man off. He simply held the guard's gaze steady and unblinking the way he used to look at men across conference tables when they had misunderstood who was in control. "That's fine," Jonathan said at last, calm, almost bored. "She's with me." The guard stepped back immediately. Apologies followed quiet and efficient like paperwork filed after a mistake no one wanted attached to their name. The moment passed, but it left a residue in the air, something sour and electric. Linda watched it all without moving. Her smile had returned, but it was thinner now, stretched tight across her face. "Well," she said lightly, clapping her hands once, as if to reset the room. "Let's not block the entrance. Drinks are to the left. Seating will begin shortly." She turned before either of them could respond, already greeting another guest, already rewriting the scene in her head. Jonathan and Sarah moved forward together, the floor beneath their shoes gleaming like ice. Sarah felt it then, not the eyes, not the whispers, the shift, the sense that the room was recalculating her, slotting her into a category that did not yet exist. She kept her chin level, her steps measured. Her heel caught briefly on the edge of a rug. She corrected without looking down. At a cocktail table near the windows, two men leaned, close voices low but careless. "That's Reed's new charity project," one murmured. "Bold of him to bring staff." "Or sloppy," the other replied. Linda always said he lacked polish. Sarah heard them. Of course she did. Years of moving through spaces where people assumed she was deaf had sharpened her hearing. She did not react. But Jonathan did. He slowed just enough, his shoulder angling toward them, a silent reminder that walls have ears, and so do the people you underestimate. They reached the edge of the ballroom. Servers passed with trays held high, champagne flutes catching the light. One brushed too close, and a glass tipped struck Sarah's elbow and shattered. The sound was violent, sudden, unforgiving. The room froze. Sarah felt the cold splash across her wrist, the sting of it, the absurd clarity of the moment. She looked down at the shards on the floor, then up at the faces watching her decide who she was going to be next. "I'm so sorry," the server stammered, already backing away, eyes wide with fear. "I didn't see." "It's fine," Sarah said, cutting him off. She crouched before anyone could stop, her fingers moving with instinct, not panic. Jonathan reached for her arm, but she shook her head once, subtle final. "I've got it!" Someone hissed. "Don't touch that." But she was already gathering the larger pieces, careful, precise. Blood welled at the tip of her finger, a small red bead against pale skin. She pressed it with her thumb, stood, and met the nearest stare. "I said it's fine," she repeated. And something in the way she said it made people look away. Music resumed, tentative at first. Conversations followed louder than before, layered with forced normalcy. But the damage was done. Sarah felt it settle into her bones. This night would not glide past her unnoticed. It would grind. Jonathan leaned close. "We can leave," he said quietly. "No," Sarah replied. "If we leave now, this becomes the story." He studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the faint tremor she had not quite hidden. "Then we stay," he said. It was not a concession. It was alignment. They took their seats near the front, a place that felt deliberately exposed. Linda stood a few feet away, greeting guests as if nothing had happened, but her eyes kept flicking back sharp and calculating. When she finally approached, it was with a glass raised and a voice tuned for civility. "Sarah was it," Linda said. "I don't believe we've met properly." Sarah stood. It was automatic, respectful, old habits. Linda clocked it instantly. "No," Sarah said. "We haven't." Linda's smile deepened. "Jonathan has always been generous," she said. "He has a habit of collecting people who need him." The words were velvet-wrapped, but the blade inside them gleamed. A few nearby guests leaned in, pretending not to. Sarah felt the heat rise in her chest. Not anger, something older, wearier. She could feel Jonathan beside her, ready now, waiting for the cue she might never give. "I don't need him," Sarah said. The sentence surprised even her. It landed harder than she intended, heavy with truth she had carried too long. "But I appreciate honesty when it's offered." Linda's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Of course," she replied. "Honesty is refreshing." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Linda, he said we should let the evening move forward." Linda inclined her head, all grace and restraint. "Enjoy the night," she said, then turned away, heels clicking each step, precise, controlled. The ceremony began soon after, vows spoken, applause measured. Sarah listened, but her thoughts drifted, snagging on memories she had not invited. The first winter after her husband died. The house she sold because the mortgage did not care about grief. The day she applied for the job at Jonathan's house, hands shaking, resume folded too many times. She had thought it temporary, a way to catch her breath. 7 years later, here she was sitting under chandeliers, being tested by a world that had never expected her to stand. During the reception, the questions came. Not directly, never directly. A woman with pearls too large to be tasteful asked Sarah where she was from, then followed with "no originally." A man with a senator's pin commented on her shoes, then asked if she found the commute difficult. Sarah answered what she chose to answer. She deflected what she did not. She felt herself tiring the constant vigilance, draining the sense of being on trial without charges. At the bar, Jonathan was cornered by an old associate, a man who spoke in the language of favors and history. Sarah stood a step behind him, invisible again by design. The man glanced at her, then leaned in. "Careful, John," he murmured, not quietly enough. "People are watching. This doesn't play the way you think it does." Jonathan smiled thinly. "It plays exactly the way it needs to." Sarah caught the look that followed. Not concern. Calculation. She understood then that this night was not just about Linda, or pride, or closure. It was about leverage, about perception, about a man who had stepped away from power but never truly let it go. She felt the weight of that realization settle in her gut. Later, as speeches began, Linda took the microphone. Her voice was steady, practiced, warm. She thanked donors. She thanked family. She thanked the city. And then, as if by accident, her gaze found Sarah. "Some guests," Linda said, smiling, "remind us that life takes unexpected turns, that not everyone arrives where they plan to be." A ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. Sarah's breath caught. She felt the familiar urge rise, to shrink, to let it pass, to survive by silence. Jonathan did not move. The microphone crackled. The room waited. Sarah stood. It was not dramatic. No chair scraped, no gasp, just a woman rising to her feet, pulse loud in her ears, hands steady at her sides. "I didn't plan to be here either," Sarah said. Her voice carried without effort. "But plans change. Especially when you stop measuring your life by who approves of it." The laughter died. "I spent years thinking arrival meant success," she continued. "It doesn't. Staying does. Standing does. And sometimes the most unexpected turn is realizing you don't need permission to take up space." Silence spread thick and undeniable. Sarah sat. Jonathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, something unguarded flickering there. Linda stared at her glass lips pressed tight. In the back of the room, A man with a discreet lapel pin reached for his phone, already rethinking a conversation scheduled for the following week. Because something had shifted. Not loudly, not completely, but enough. And Sarah Miller, who had once cleaned floors no one noticed, felt the room finally see her, not as staff, not as charity, not as a mistake, but as a presence that could not be erased. The night was far from over, and the real consequences had only just begun. The silence after Sarah sat down did not break all at once. It cracked in layers. A chair scraped somewhere near the back. A cough followed, too loud, too intentional. Glasses clinked. The string quartet resumed with a careful softness, as if testing whether the room would allow music again. Conversations restarted in fragments. Voices lower than before, shaped differently, cautious now. Linda Whitman remained standing for a second longer than she should have. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass, her jaw locked. For a woman who had spent decades mastering rooms like this, the loss of control registered not as anger, but as something colder. Calculation recalibrating under pressure. "Well," Linda said lightly, forcing a laugh that did not reach her eyes. "Isn't that a reminder that we all have stories?" She lifted her glass. To new chapters. A few guests raised theirs. Not many. Enough to keep the moment from collapsing into open fracture. Linda drank, set the glass down, and stepped away from the microphone. Applause followed, polite and uneven. Sarah stayed seated. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She kept her hands folded, nails pressed into her palm, grounding herself in the physical sensation. She did not look at Jonathan. She did not look at Linda. She stared straight ahead, letting the moment move past her without reaching for it. Jonathan watched the room instead. He saw the shift in posture, the way shoulders angled toward Sarah now subtly, the way a few people who had ignored her earlier suddenly pretended familiarity as if proximity could rewrite intent. He saw, too, the men who had gone still, eyes narrowed, minds working through implications they had not anticipated. This was the part most people missed, the quiet aftermath, the recalculation. A man in a charcoal suit leaned toward his wife and whispered something sharp. She shook her head once, then glanced toward Jonathan with a new expression. Not disdain, not curiosity, recognition. Jonathan felt something old stir in his chest. Not pride, something heavier, responsibility. A server approached Sarah with a fresh napkin, murmured an apology that was unnecessary. Sarah thanked him anyway. Her voice was steady now, but the cost of it sat deep, a dull ache behind her ribs. Jonathan leaned in. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes," Sarah replied. "I did." She turned to him then finally. Her eyes were clear, but there was a line of tension at the corner of her mouth. "You brought me here to stand." I stood. He held her gaze for a long moment. "You changed the temperature of the room." "I didn't mean to," she said. "That's why it worked." Across the ballroom, Linda had regrouped. She moved through clusters of guests with practiced ease, laughter restored posture, flawless. But the energy around her had shifted. Where once people leaned in eagerly now, they held back a fraction. Enough to notice. Enough to irritate. She spotted Eleanor Price near the bar, an old ally, a woman whose family name carried weight in quiet places. Linda approached, lowering her voice. "This was not part of the plan," Linda said. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward Sarah, then back. "Plans rarely survive people," she replied. Linda's smile tightened. "Jonathan enjoys theatrics." "He enjoys leverage," Eleanor corrected. "And tonight he has it." Linda's fingers curled against her clutch. "He brought a housekeeper to humiliate me." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "He brought a woman who refused to be humiliated. There's a difference." Linda inhaled slowly. "You think this matters?" "I think Eleanor said carefully that people are watching how you respond." Linda straightened. Then I will respond gracefully. She crossed the room again, this time toward Jonathan and Sarah, her expression composed, her movements precise. Jonathan saw her coming and braced. Sarah felt it too, the prickle at the base of her spine. Sarah, Linda said warmly, stopping just short of their table. May I speak with you for a moment? Sarah stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she trusted them. Of course. Jonathan did not rise. He did not interrupt. He watched Linda's face instead, the micro-expressions slipping through the polish. They stepped a few feet away, close enough to be seen, far enough to suggest privacy. Linda lowered her voice. You embarrassed me, she said softly. I didn't intend to, Sarah replied. But you did, Linda continued. And in this room, intention doesn't matter, only impact. Sarah nodded once. I understand that. Linda studied her, searching for weakness. Do you know what people are saying about you? I can guess. They're asking why Jonathan Reed would risk his reputation for someone like you. Sarah met her gaze. Then maybe they're asking the wrong question. Linda's lips thinned. You're enjoying this? Sarah shook her head. I'm enduring it. Something flickered across Linda's face. Not pity, not sympathy. Recognition, again, unwanted and sharp. For a brief second, the mask slipped. You think you've won something, Linda said. I didn't come here to win, Sarah replied. I came here to not disappear. Linda stepped back, her smile returning harder now. Be careful, she said. Men like Jonathan don't build empires by accident. They don't give without taking. Sarah watched her walk away, the silk of her dress whispering against the floor. The warning lingered. Jonathan joined her moments later. What did she say? That you don't give without taking, Sarah answered. He exhaled. She always did think in transactions. Is she wrong? Jonathan did not answer immediately. He glanced around the room again, taking in the faces, the shifting alliances, the quiet conversations being restructured in real time. No, he said finally, but she's incomplete. They moved toward the edge of the ballroom, where tall windows overlooked the darkened grounds. Snow had begun to fall, thin and persistent, dusting the hedges and walkways. The sight calmed Sarah, the rhythm of it steady and indifferent to human drama. I didn't realize, Sarah said, choosing her words carefully, that tonight would be about more than a wedding. Jonathan leaned against the window frame. Neither did I, he said, and it was the truth, though not the whole of it. Across the room, a man with a discreet pin approached Linda again, voice low, urgent. Jonathan caught fragments as the music swelled. A committee, a board, a decision postponed. He felt the corner of his mouth lift. Not satisfaction. Acknowledgement. You see it now, he said to Sarah. She nodded slowly. This isn't about me. No, Jonathan replied. But you're the catalyst. Sarah absorbed that, the weight of it settling uncomfortably. I didn't ask for that. I know, he said. Neither did I once. The reception continued, but the night had changed course. People approached Sarah differently now, some with genuine curiosity, others with thinly veiled opportunism. She navigated each interaction with care, aware that every word carried more weight than it should. At one point, a woman whose name Sarah did not catch leaned in and whispered, "You were very brave." Sarah smiled faintly. "I was very tired." The woman laughed, surprised, then thoughtful. As the evening wore on, Jonathan felt the familiar hum return beneath his skin. The sense of being watched, evaluated, measured. He had stepped away from this world years ago, convinced he was finished with it. Tonight proved otherwise. Sarah stood beside him, shoulders squared, presence undeniable. She did not know it yet, but she had crossed an invisible line. There was no going back to being unseen, And somewhere beyond the chandeliers and snow-covered lawns, the machinery of power had begun to turn again, drawn by a woman who had simply refused to lower her eyes. The real reckoning was coming. Jonathan felt it in his bones. The first real fracture came from the back of the room, not the front. A man Sarah recognized from the early question's gray-haired, careful smile stepped toward Jonathan with a hand extended a little too eagerly. "Jonathan," he said, voice smooth. "It's been a long time. We should talk." Jonathan did not take the hand immediately. He glanced at it, then at the man's face, measuring. "Now doesn't seem urgent." The smile tightened. "It is, given recent developments." Sarah felt the word developments land like a hook. She shifted slightly, not retreating, not advancing, just present. Jonathan finally shook the man's hand, brief and firm. "Say what you need to say." The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There are people here who didn't expect tonight to unfold this way. Some of them are reconsidering old positions." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Positions on what?" The man hesitated. That hesitation said more than any answer. He glanced at Sarah, then back at Jonathan. "You know what?" Jonathan released his hand. "If they have something to say, they can say it to me directly." The man nodded, already backing away. "Of course. I just thought you'd want to know the temperature." Jonathan watched him go. "They always think I care about temperature," he murmured. Sarah looked at him. "Do you?" "I care about pressure," Jonathan replied. "Temperature is just noise." They moved toward a quieter corner near the terrace doors. The music softened behind them, replaced by the muffled sounds of the evening. Sarah felt the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her shoulders ached, her jaw hurt from holding tension. "You're carrying this," Jonathan said, noticing. "You don't have to," "I know," Sarah replied. "But if I set it down, it might come back louder." He considered that. "That's true." For a moment they stood in silence, watching snow gather along the edges of the windows. The estate grounds looked peaceful from here, untouched by the undercurrents inside. Sarah focused on that stillness, letting it anchor her. "I didn't ask," she said after a moment, "what this night means for you." Jonathan's reflection stared back at him in the glass, older than he felt, sharper than he wanted to be. "It means," he said slowly, "that I miscalculated." Sarah turned to him. "About what?" "About how cleanly I could leave this world behind." He exhaled. "I thought stepping away would make me irrelevant. Tonight reminded me that power doesn't disappear. It waits. And bringing me," Sarah said carefully, "was that part of the calculation." Jonathan met her gaze. It started as one he admitted, but it stopped being that the moment you stood up. Before Sarah could respond, Linda's voice cut through the space behind them. "Jonathan!" They turned together. Linda stood a few steps away, her posture perfect, her expression carefully neutral. "May I have a word?" "Alone." Jonathan did not move. "Anything you need to say can be said here." Linda's eyes flicked to Sarah, irritation flashing through the polish. "This is between us." "No," Jonathan said evenly. "It isn't." Linda inhaled, slow and controlled. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "You're enjoying this, watching me lose footing." Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "You never lost footing, Linda. You just mistook control for stability." Her lips pressed together. "You brought her here to provoke me." "I brought her here because I trust her," Jonathan replied. "The provocation is incidental." Linda laughed softly. "You always did like to reframe." She turned to Sarah. "Do you know what he's done?" she asked in the past when someone became inconvenient. Sarah met her gaze without flinching. "I know what he's done for people who were honest with him." Linda's eyes hardened. "Honesty is expensive." "So is performance," Sarah said. "It just hides the bill longer." For a moment, Linda said nothing. Then she smiled again, sharp and bright. "Enjoy the rest of the evening," she said. "Both of you." She turned and walked away, heels clicking back straight. But the confidence she wore earlier had not returned. Jonathan watched her go, then looked at Sarah. "She's afraid." "Of losing face," Sarah said. "Of losing relevance," Jonathan corrected. "They're not the same." A sudden ripple moved through the room. A cluster of guests near the head table leaned in, voices rising. A phone buzzed, then another. Jonathan felt it before he saw it. "What now?" Sarah asked quietly. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. Something leaked. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Price stood, rigid, phone pressed to her ear, eyes locked on Jonathan. When she lowered it, she moved fast, weaving through guests with purpose. She stopped in front of him, breath tight. "You should leave," Eleanor said under her breath. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like concern." "It's damage control," she replied. "Someone just circulated an old filing, one you thought was buried." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "What filing?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "A trust document." Eleanor's eyes flicked to Sarah, then away. "They're spinning it already, painting tonight as a setup, as manipulation." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Of course they are." "What does it say?" Sarah asked. "That Jonathan Reed has more leverage than anyone in this room realized," Eleanor said. "And that you may not be here by accident." Sarah's stomach dropped. "You said I trusted you." Jonathan cut in. "That hasn't changed, but you didn't tell me the ground was already unstable," Sarah said, her voice tight. Jonathan met her gaze. For the first time that night, something like regret crossed his face. "I didn't know it was going to shift tonight." The murmurs around them grew louder now, no longer contained. Names were being said, numbers implied. A story was forming fast and hungry. Linda reappeared near the center of the room, phone in hand, her expression finally cracking. She caught Jonathan's eye, and something passed between them, old and bitter. "You planned this," she mouthed. Jonathan did not respond. Sarah felt the weight of the room pressing in again, heavier than before. "This is what she warned me about," she said quietly. "That you don't give without taking." Jonathan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. Whatever they think, whatever they say, you do not become collateral." "You already made me visible," Sarah replied. "That was never going to be safe." He nodded. "Then we finish this cleanly." Music faltered. A glass shattered somewhere else this time. The crowd had reached that tipping point where politeness frays and instinct takes over. Jonathan straightened his posture, shifting the old authority, settling back into place like armor. He turned toward the room, eyes scanning faces, measuring, deciding. Sarah watched him, heart pounding, realizing with sudden clarity that the man beside her had never truly stepped away from power. He had only been waiting for the right moment to reclaim it. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Jonathan's gaze locked on the head table. "Remind them who sets the terms." As he took his first step forward, the room seemed to lean toward him, drawn by gravity it could not resist. And Sarah Miller, standing at the edge of that moment, understood that the night was no longer about dignity alone. It was about truth exposure, and the cost of refusing to stay small. The reveal was coming. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked toward the center of the ballroom with the calm of a man who had already made his decision, the kind of calm that unsettles people more than anger ever could. Conversations thinned as he passed. Eyes followed. Phones slipped quietly back into pockets. Whatever rumor had begun to spread was still half-formed, still hungry, and the room sensed that it was about to be fed. Sarah stayed where she was for one heartbeat longer, the instinct to follow fighting with the instinct to protect herself. Then she moved. Not behind him, beside him. Close enough to be seen, not close enough to be hidden. At the head table, Linda stood rigid, one hand braced against the edge as if the floor beneath her had shifted. Her new husband leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She did not respond. Her attention was locked on Jonathan, on the set of his shoulders, on the way he claimed space without asking for it. Jonathan stopped near the microphone stand. The same one Linda had used minutes earlier, the same polished surface that now reflected his face back at him, older, sharper, lined with choices he no longer regretted. "Jonathan," someone called from the side, attempting levity. This is hardly the time. Jonathan lifted a hand. Not a gesture of dominance, a gesture of pause. The room obeyed. "I won't take long," he said, voice even measured. "And I won't insult you by pretending this is about celebration." A ripple moved through the guests. Not outrage, interest. This evening, Jonathan continued, has been framed as spectacle, a merging of families, of influence, of carefully curated narratives. His gaze moved slow and deliberate across the faces watching him. But narratives only hold as long as everyone agrees to perform them. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settle into her spine. Her breath slowed. Whatever came next would not be gentle. "There seems to be some confusion," Jonathan said, "about why I'm here, and why Sarah Miller is here with me." He paused. "Let the name land." Sarah felt it, the way her name shifted the air. No longer an object, a subject. "She is not my employee tonight," Jonathan said. "She is not a statement. She is not bait." His eyes flicked briefly toward Linda. "And she is certainly not an accident." Linda's lips parted. "Jonathan, this is inappropriate." Jonathan did not look at her. "What's inappropriate," he said, "is the assumption that power only speaks one language." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Several guests leaned forward, tension sharpening. Phones appeared again, discreet, hungry. Jonathan removed a slim folder. No flourish, no drama. He set it on the table beside the microphone. "Some of you have already seen pieces of this," he said. "Or think you have." Eleanor Price stiffened near the bar. "This is not a trust document," Jonathan continued. "It's an addendum, filed quietly years ago. Because I learned a long time ago that transparency is only praised when it doesn't threaten anyone." He opened the folder. The sound of paper was loud in the silence. "For the past 8 years, Jonathan said a private endowment I control has funded legal defense, medical advocacy, and housing stabilization for individuals displaced by development projects in this city." A murmur rippled through the room, sharper now. "Projects many of you invested in," Jonathan added. Linda turned fully toward him. "You're lying." Jonathan met her gaze at last. "You never asked." Sarah's chest tightened. This was bigger than she had realized. Bigger than pride or revenge or a wedding night wounded by ego. "I stepped away from active management because I wanted to see what my absence revealed," Jonathan said. "Who benefited? Who exploited the silence?" His eyes swept the room again, landing briefly on a man near the back who had gone pale. "And tonight," he continued, "when Sarah was mistaken for staff, when she was dismissed, when she was mocked, the room behaved exactly as expected." Sarah felt the eyes on her again, but this time they were different, heavier, more careful. "She has spent her life navigating systems designed to ignore her," Jonathan said. "Not because she lacks value, because acknowledging it would be inconvenient." He closed the folder. "So here's the clarification. I did not bring Sarah to make a point. I brought her because she already understood the cost of silence." Linda's voice cut through sharp, now stripped of polish. "You're using her." Jonathan's expression hardened. "No, I'm standing with her." He turned slightly enough to include Sarah fully in the frame. She felt the heat of the room press in the urge to retreat rising hard and fast. Then she remembered the words she had already spoken tonight. She did not need permission. Jonathan stepped back. Just half a step. Space opening. An invitation without force. Sarah inhaled. Once, twice. She could hear her own heartbeat steady now. I didn't know about the endowment, she said, her voice carrying without strain. I didn't know about any of this. She let her gaze travel across the room, meeting faces that had looked through her hours earlier. But I do know what it feels like to live in the margins of decisions made by people who never have to explain themselves. Linda laughed brittle. And you think this makes you qualified to judge us? Sarah turned to her. No, I think it makes me qualified to refuse your judgment. Silence fell again, deeper this time. I didn't come here to expose anyone, Sarah continued. I came because I was asked to stand beside someone who was tired of pretending he didn't see the damage done in his name. She paused. Her hands trembled now just slightly. She did not hide it. If that makes you uncomfortable, she said, good. Discomfort is where accountability starts. Someone near the front shifted, then stood. A man in a tailored suit, older voice careful. Jonathan, he said, if this is true, there will be questions. Legal ones. Jonathan nodded. I've been answering them for years. Another voice followed. Why reveal this now? Jonathan's jaw tightened. Because silence only protects the powerful. And because tonight made it clear who is still listening. Linda stepped back, her composure finally breaking. You've humiliated me, she said, her voice rising. Jonathan's reply was quiet. You humiliated yourself by assuming the room belonged to you. The fallout began immediately. Conversations exploded. Phones came out openly now. Guests clustered, some moving away from Linda, others toward Jonathan. Alliances cracked and reformed in real time. Sarah felt dizzy, the adrenaline surging too fast. Jonathan noticed. He touched her elbow, grounding. We should go, he said. She nodded. As they moved toward the exit, no one stopped them. Not security. Not friends. Not adversaries. The room parted instinctively, the way it always did when power revealed itself clearly. Outside, the cold air hit Sarah's face like a benediction. She breathed deeply, lungs burning snowflakes melting against her cheeks. They reached the car. Jonathan opened the door for her, then paused. I didn't plan to say everything tonight, he said, but I don't regret it. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him, the man behind the strategy, the weight of years visible now. Neither do I, she said. But you should know something. He waited. I didn't stand up there for your cause, she said. I stood up for myself. Jonathan nodded. That's why it mattered. As the car pulled away from the estate lights receding into the dark, Sarah watched the building shrink in the window. The world she had entered tonight would never see her the same way again. Neither would Jonathan. And somewhere behind them, the machinery of influence ground forward louder, now no longer able to pretend it hadn't been challenged. The night had crossed its point of no return. The car did not head back toward Beacon Hill. Jonathan noticed it first, the subtle change in direction, the way the city lights rearranged themselves outside the window. Sarah felt it seconds later, the instinctive awareness that came from years of watching patterns. She did not speak. Neither did he. The driver's hands were steady on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead, jaw set. Where are we going? Sarah asked finally. Somewhere neutral, Jonathan said. Somewhere I don't own. That alone told her this was not over. The city slid past in streaks of sodium light and shadow. Snow thickened, blurring the edges of buildings, muting sound. Jonathan's phone vibrated once, then again, then did not stop. He turned it face down without looking. "You're going to have to answer those," Sarah said. "I will," he replied. "Just not yet." They stopped in front of an old brick hotel near the river, the kind of place that had survived because it never tried to impress anyone. The driver got out, opened Jonathan's door, then Sarah's. His movements were precise, professional, but his eyes lingered on Jonathan a fraction longer than necessary. "Call if you need me," the driver said. Jonathan nodded. "I will." Inside the lobby was quiet, the air warm, the scent of coffee and polished wood settling around them. A woman at the desk looked up, recognition flickering, and then flattening into discretion. She handed Jonathan a key without comment. The elevator ride was silent. Sarah leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing down now that the adrenaline had ebbed. Her hands shook. She clasped them together, breathed through it. The room was simple. 2 chairs, a small table, curtains half drawn, snow tapping softly against the window like fingers asking to be let in. Jonathan loosened his tie, then stopped as if reconsidering. He left it in place. "They're going to try to separate us," he said. Sarah looked at him. "Who?" "Everyone," Jonathan replied. "Linda, the board members who thought I was finished, the people who invested in the silence and just realized it has an expiration date." "And what do you want?" Sarah asked. Jonathan met her gaze. "I want you safe, and I want the truth out without turning you into a symbol you didn't ask to be." Sarah exhaled slowly. "That may not be possible. I know." She moved to the window, looked down at the river black and steady beneath the falling snow. "When you brought me tonight," she said, "did you think it would end like this?" "No," Jonathan replied. "I thought it would expose them. I didn't expect it to expose me." She turned back. "Expose what?" He hesitated. The pause was new. Jonathan Reed was not a man who paused often. "I told you I stepped away to see who benefited from my absence," he said. "That was only part of it." Sarah waited. "There was a deal," Jonathan continued, "years ago, before I retired, before the surgery. It involved land acquisitions that displaced people who never should have been displaced. The legalities were clean. The ethics were not." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. "And you signed?" "Yes." Silence settled between them, heavy but honest. The endowment, Jonathan said, wasn't charity. It was restitution. Quiet, imperfect, insufficient. Sarah absorbed that. And tonight made it public. "Yes." She nodded once. "Then they'll come for you harder." Jonathan's mouth curved in something like a smile. "They already are." His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. "Jonathan Reed," he said. The voice on the other end was sharp, controlled. "You crossed a line." Jonathan leaned against the table. "You drew it." "This affects people," the voice continued. "Deals. Futures." "So did the displacements," Jonathan replied. Funny how that didn't seem to matter. A pause. "We can contain this." Jonathan glanced at Sarah. She was watching him closely now, not intruding, not absent. Present in a way that made avoidance impossible. "No," Jonathan said. "You can't." The call ended. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They're afraid." "They should be," Jonathan replied. Another knock came at the door. Sharp. Deliberate. Jonathan's posture shifted instantly. He moved to the door, opened it a fraction. Eleanor Price stood in the hallway, coat still on, eyes bright with urgency. "You need to listen," she said. Jonathan stepped aside. "Come in." She did pacing immediately, energy tight. "You've triggered an audit," Eleanor said. "Not the kind you can manage quietly." Jonathan nodded. "Good." Eleanor stopped, stared at him. "This isn't a game." "No," he agreed. "It's accountability." Her gaze slid to Sarah. "You didn't tell her everything." Jonathan did not respond. Sarah met Eleanor's eyes. "What didn't he tell me?" Eleanor hesitated. Then, with a sharp breath, "The endowment is the least of it. There's a controlling interest. Quietly held. Enough to freeze certain projects midstream if activated." Sarah's chest tightened. "You could shut them down." "Yes," Jonathan said, "and expose myself fully in the process." Eleanor's voice dropped. "If you do that, there's no going back." Jonathan looked at Sarah. "I know." Eleanor followed his gaze, understanding dawning. "You're tying this to her." "I'm tying it to timing," Jonathan corrected. "And to choice." Eleanor shook her head. "You're gambling." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I always was." She looked between them, then sighed. "You'll have to move fast. The narrative will turn by morning." "Then we move before morning," Jonathan said. Eleanor turned to Sarah. "You should leave. Now. Let this be his fight." Sarah did not answer immediately. She thought of the ballroom, the microphone, the way the room had listened when she spoke. "No," she said finally. "If my name is already in their mouths, I don't get to pretend this isn't mine." Jonathan's eyes softened. "You don't owe me, I don't," Sarah agreed. "But I owe myself not to disappear again." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then understand this," she said. "Once he activates that leverage, people will look for a scapegoat. They'll look for you." Sarah met her gaze. They already were. Eleanor exhaled. "You're braver than I thought." "I'm just tired," Sarah replied. Eleanor left soon after the door closing softly behind her. The room felt smaller without her, quieter, more real. Jonathan moved to the table, opened his laptop. Lines of text filled the screen. Documents, names, numbers spelled out in full, careful, and damning. "This is the point of no return," he said. Sarah stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. "What happens if you don't do it?" Jonathan's fingers hovered over the trackpad. "Then tonight becomes gossip, and nothing changes." She placed her hand on the table steady. "And if you do—" "Then everything changes," Jonathan replied, "including how they see you." Sarah looked at the screen, then at him. "I don't need them to see me kindly." Jonathan met her gaze. "I need them to see you clearly." He clicked. The file uploaded. Somewhere in the city, servers hummed. Emails queued. Phones began to buzz. Sarah felt it then, the deep, irreversible shift. The sense that the world they had stepped into would not let them step back out. Jonathan closed the laptop. "It's done." Outside, the snow fell harder, thick and unrelenting, covering tracks, rewriting surfaces. Sarah moved to the window again, watching the city absorb the change without comment. "You're not the man they think you are," she said quietly. Jonathan joined her, standing close, but not touching. "Neither are you." Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but rising, part of the city's endless churn. The night stretched ahead, heavy with consequence. And for the first time since the ballroom, Sarah felt something other than fear settle into her chest. Resolve. Morning did not arrive gently. It came in the form of vibration, sharp and relentless. Jonathan's phone rattling across the small table as if it were alive. Sarah woke instantly, the habit of years snapping her into alertness before her eyes fully opened. Pale winter light seeped through the curtains, washing the room in gray. Jonathan was already awake. She could tell by the way he sat at the edge of the bed phone to his ear, shoulders squared, listening without interruption. "No," he said quietly. "That's not accurate. And you know it." He ended the call, set the phone down, and rubbed a hand over his face. The lines there looked deeper now, etched by a night that had not loosened its grip. "They're moving fast," Sarah said. "They always do when the ground shifts," Jonathan replied. "Speed is how they regain control." She sat up, feet touching the cold floor. "What are they saying?" Jonathan gave a short, humorless breath. "That I orchestrated a scene. That I weaponized sympathy. That you're a narrative device." Sarah absorbed that without flinching. "And you." "That I've gone unstable," Jonathan said. "That retirement softened my judgment." She nodded once. "And the truth," he looked at her then, "the truth doesn't trend as well." The knock came again, sharp and insistent. Not room service, not housekeeping. Jonathan stood, adjusted his jacket, and opened the door. Two men stood in the hallway, both in dark coats, both with the posture of people who expected doors to open for them. Jonathan Reed, the taller one, said, "We'd like a word." Jonathan did not step aside. "You're having one." The man's gaze flicked to Sarah, then back. "In private." "No," Jonathan replied. "Anything you need to say can be said here." A pause. Then the shorter man spoke, voice clipped. "You released proprietary information last night." Jonathan's expression did not change. "I released documentation, which caused a measurable impact," the man said. "Several projects are now under review." "As they should be," Jonathan replied. The taller man shifted. "You're putting pressure on people who don't appreciate it." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Pressure reveals structure." Sarah watched them closely. She noticed the way their eyes avoided hers now. Not dismissive, wary. "We're here to advise you," the shorter man said. "Deactivate the controlling interest. Let this settle." Jonathan's voice hardened. "That interest exists for this exact reason." The taller man's jaw tightened. "You're burning bridges." Jonathan met his gaze. They were built on sand. Silence stretched. Then the men stepped back, retreating without another word. The hallway swallowed them whole. Sarah exhaled. "That was fast. That was reconnaissance," Jonathan said. "The real push comes later." His phone buzzed again. This time he answered immediately. "Yes," he said. "I saw it." "No. I won't comment yet." "Thank you." He ended the call, turned to Sarah. "The story's shifting." "How?" "They've stopped pretending you're irrelevant," Jonathan said. "Now they're trying to define you." Sarah felt a familiar tension settle in her chest. "As what?" "As a risk." She laughed softly, surprised by the sound. "I clean houses." Jonathan looked at her steadily. "You disrupted a room full of people who rely on predictability. That makes you dangerous to them." They dressed quickly. Practical clothes. No pretenses. When they stepped outside, the city felt altered sharper, as if it had woken up to a different set of rules. The driver was already waiting. "Office," Jonathan said. Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure?" Jonathan met her eyes. "If we retreat now, they rewrite everything." She nodded, climbed into the car. Jonathan's office was quieter than she expected. Not the buzzing hive of assistants and meetings she had imagined, but a stripped-down space, intentional and sparse. Files lined one wall. Windows overlooked the river. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. As they entered, a woman rose from behind a desk. Early 50s, calm, alert. "Mr. Reed," she said. "I'm glad you're here." Jonathan nodded. "Martha. This is Sarah Miller." Martha's gaze sharpened, not with judgment, but with assessment. "I've heard of you," she said to Sarah. Sarah blinked. Already? Yes, Martha replied. For what it's worth, you said what most of them were afraid to. She handed Jonathan a tablet. We've got 3 inquiries. 1 media request. 2 board members distancing themselves. And a donor who just pulled out. Jonathan scanned the screen. Expected. Martha hesitated. There's also something else. She turned the tablet toward Sarah. A headline glowed on the screen. Who is Sarah Miller, and why is she standing next to Jonathan Reed? Sarah felt her stomach drop. They found me. They found a version of you, Jonathan said. Not the whole. Martha spoke carefully. They're digging into your past. Employment. Family. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Images surfaced unbidden. Her husband's obituary, the foreclosure notice, the years of invisibility that had once felt like protection. Let them, Sarah said quietly. I don't have secrets, just context. Jonathan watched her closely. This will get harder. I know. A pause. Then Martha said, There's one more thing. She tapped the screen again. A legal document appeared, names highlighted. Jonathan stiffened. That's not supposed to be public. It wasn't, Martha said. Someone leaked a partial. Sarah leaned closer, reading. Her name was there. Not as an owner. Not as a beneficiary. As a witness. Her heart stuttered. I signed something. Jonathan nodded slowly. Years ago. When you testified on behalf of a tenant group. You didn't know who funded the case. Sarah remembered the room, the peeling paint, the trembling voices. She had spoken because no one else would. That was you, she said. Jonathan met her gaze. Yes. The room went quiet. So this isn't new, Sarah said. They've been watching. They just didn't expect you to step into the light, Jonathan replied. Martha broke the silence. We need a strategy. Jonathan nodded. We tell the truth. Martha blinked. That's risky. Jonathan's mouth curved slightly. So is pretending. He turned to Sarah. You don't have to stay. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'm not leaving. Jonathan studied her, then nodded once. Then we do this together. Outside, the city moved on unaware or pretending to be. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. The lines between private and public, between helper and architect, between silence and voice. Sarah stood near the window, watching the river flow steady and unbothered by the storms above it. They'll try to make this about me, she said. Jonathan joined her. They already are. She turned to him. Then, let them see who I actually am. Jonathan smiled, not with satisfaction, but with something like respect. For the first time, the narrative was not being shaped by those who had always held the pen, and that frightened them more than anything else ever had. The first live segment aired just after 9 in the morning. Sarah watched it on a muted television mounted high on the office wall, the anchor's mouth moving with practiced urgency, the headline pulsing beneath her image like a warning label. Her name looked strange in block letters. Too loud. Too permanent. Jonathan stood a few feet away, jacket off now, sleeves rolled, phone pressed to his ear. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was clipped, precise, surgical. No, he said. We're not issuing a statement yet. A pause. Because this isn't about controlling the story, it's about ending it. He ended the call and turned toward Sarah. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. They're calling me a whistleblower, she said. Jonathan followed her gaze. That's one version. They're also calling me a plant, she added. A pawn. Someone you coached. Jonathan's jaw tightened. They're trying to strip you of agency. If you're manipulated, they don't have to take you seriously. Sarah finally looked at him. What if I don't want them to take me seriously? What if I just want them to stop talking? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, stared down at the river, the steady movement grounding him. They won't, he said finally. Not yet. Martha returned to the room with a stack of printed pages, her expression controlled but tense. We have confirmation, she said. A committee hearing has been requested. Not public. Yet. Jonathan nodded. Timeline. 48 hours, Martha replied. They're fast-tracking. Sarah felt her chest tighten. About what? About whether Jonathan's actions constitute interference, Martha said. And whether you're a liability. Sarah laughed softly, the sound edged. That's generous. Martha met her eyes. They're not interested in fairness, they're interested in containment. Jonathan turned back. Then we don't contain. We clarify. Martha hesitated. You're talking about testimony. Yes, Jonathan said. Sarah felt the room tilt. Mine. Jonathan's gaze held hers. Only if you choose it. She looked back at the television. The anchor had switched to a panel now. 4 faces, all confident, all certain. None of them knew her. I didn't grow up thinking my voice mattered, Sarah said quietly. I learned to make myself useful instead. Jonathan watched her silent. If I speak, she continued, they'll pick me apart. They'll bring up my husband, my foreclosure, the years I cleaned houses to survive. They will. Jonathan agreed, because they mistake exposure for power. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then let them see it. All of it. Jonathan's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. This won't be dignified. She nodded. Neither was silence. Martha stepped in. If you do this, we prepare. Every document. Every timeline. No surprises. Sarah turned to her. I don't need to look perfect. Martha studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good. Because perfect reads as dishonest. The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon in a federal building that looked exactly like what it was, a place designed to intimidate by neutrality. No color, no softness, just stone and glass and echoes. They arrived separately. Sarah sat alone in a narrow waiting area, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on a small crack in the tile across from her. She wore a simple gray suit she had owned for years, the one she had worn to her husband's funeral and later to the bank when she tried to renegotiate the mortgage. It still fit. That felt like a small mercy. A man in a dark suit passed by, paused, then leaned toward another man and whispered something. They both looked at her, not with curiosity, with calculation. Jonathan was brought in through another entrance. He didn't see her until they were seated across the room from each other, the distance between them deliberate. When their eyes met, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The committee members filed in. Older men, 1 woman, all composed, all practiced. The questioning began with Jonathan. He answered cleanly. Dates, decisions, rationale. He did not apologize. He did not posture. He spoke like a man who had already accepted the consequences of his choices. Then they turned to Sarah. She stood when instructed. Her legs trembled. She did not try to hide it. State your name for the record, the chair said. Sarah Miller, she replied. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. You were present at the Whitman wedding, another member said. Why? Sarah paused. She could feel Jonathan watching her, not urging, not guiding. Just there. I was invited, she said, because I was trusted. A murmur moved through the room. And you spoke publicly, the chair continued. Without prior coordination. Yes. Why? Sarah took a breath. Because someone tried to make me smaller in a room full of people who benefit from that happening. The chair raised an eyebrow. That's not an answer. It is, Sarah replied. It's just not one you're used to. A few heads lifted. Do you consider yourself a representative of displaced communities? Another member asked. No, Sarah said. I consider myself someone who listened when no one else did. And Jonathan Reed funded those efforts. Yes. So you had a relationship? Sarah nodded. Yes. A professional one. One built on work and trust, not strategy. A man leaned forward. You expect us to believe this wasn't orchestrated. Sarah met his gaze. I expect you to believe that people who live on the margins recognize truth faster than people who live insulated from consequence. Silence followed. Not approval, not agreement, consideration. They pressed harder after that. Questions sharpened, implications layered. Sarah answered when she could. When she couldn't, she said so. I don't know. She said more than once. I didn't have access to that information. Each time the honesty landed heavier than deflection would have. When it ended, no one clapped. No one smiled. They simply stood and filed out, leaving the room colder than before. Outside, the hallway buzzed. Reporters waited behind barriers, cameras lifted, microphones extended. Jonathan exited first. He deflected questions with a raised hand and a single sentence. This isn't about me. Sarah followed moments later. The noise surged. Ms. Miller, Sarah, do you regret speaking up? Were you pressured? She stopped. The crowd stilled, sensing something unscripted. I regret staying quiet longer than I needed to, Sarah said. I regret believing that being useful was the same as being valued. Flashes popped. I'm not a symbol, she continued. I'm a person who lived with the consequences of decisions made in rooms like that one. If that makes you uncomfortable, I suggest you ask why. She turned away, then heart-pounding, legs weak. Jonathan reached her side close, but not shielding. They left together, not touching, but aligned. In the car, the city rolled past again. Familiar now. Different, too. They didn't destroy you, Jonathan said quietly. Sarah leaned back, eyes closed. They didn't get the chance. Outside, the river kept moving indifferent and steady. For the first time since the wedding, Sarah felt something loosen inside her. Not relief. Resolution. The backlash did not explode. It spread. It moved through boardrooms and inboxes, through late-night phone calls, and carefully worded memos, through people who had learned long ago that outrage was inefficient, but erosion was effective. By the third morning, the noise had thinned into something more dangerous. Quiet alignment. Sarah felt it before she saw it. The way Martha's voice changed on the phone. The way Jonathan's calendar began to fill again with meetings he had not requested. The way her own name stopped appearing in headlines and started appearing in footnotes. They're trying to make you disappear again, Jonathan said, as they sat across from each other in his office, the river dull and gray beyond the windows. Good, Sarah replied. That means I scared them enough. Jonathan studied her. There was a steadiness there now that had not existed weeks ago. Not bravado, not defiance. Something earned. They've shifted strategy, he said. They're conceding the endowment. The audit will proceed, but they're isolating the narrative, framing this as a closed chapter. And you, Sarah said. And me, Jonathan replied, as an aging benefactor who made peace with his conscience and should now step back again. Sarah smiled faintly. They want you quiet. They want me predictable, Jonathan corrected. Quiet is optional. Martha entered without knocking, tablet in hand. We have a development. Jonathan looked up. Which kind? The kind that doesn't announce itself, Martha said. 3 board members resigned within the hour. 2 cited health, 1 cited personal reflection. Jonathan leaned back. That's faster than I expected. They were the weak links, Martha replied. And someone else moved. She turned the tablet toward Sarah this time. A legal filing. Fresh. Time stamped that morning. Sarah read slowly. Community trust transfer, she said. What is this? Jonathan's gaze sharpened. They activated it. Martha nodded. Quietly. The controlling interest has been redirected into a public trust. Independent oversight. No single beneficiary. Sarah looked at Jonathan. You didn't do this. No, he said. They did. Why? Jonathan exhaled. Because the cost of fighting me became higher than the cost of conceding to the idea. Sarah absorbed that. They're buying peace. They're buying time, Jonathan said. And they're trying to take you out of the equation. Martha tapped the screen again. There's a clause, a public advisory seat, non-voting, symbolic. Sarah stiffened. For me? Jonathan nodded. Yes. The room went quiet. They want me visible but harmless, Sarah said. They want you neutralized, Jonathan replied. Respected, but contained. Sarah stared at the document, the language smooth and bloodless. Years ago, this would have felt like a victory. Recognition, a seat at the table, a name etched into legitimacy. What happens if I refuse? She asked. Martha answered carefully. They'll fill it with someone else, someone quieter, someone grateful. And if I accept? Jonathan leaned forward. Then you change what the seat means. Sarah looked at him. That's a risk. So was speaking at the wedding, he said. So was testifying. She nodded slowly. You didn't ask for any of this to become about me. Jonathan's voice softened. Neither did you, but it did. She closed the tablet. I'll accept. Martha blinked. Just like that? No, Sarah said. Not just like that. She handed the tablet back. With conditions. Jonathan's mouth curved slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. The meeting ended an hour later with revised language, tighter terms, and one clause that made Martha visibly nervous. They'll hate this, Martha said. Sarah shrugged. They already do. Outside, the city felt suspended between seasons. Snow melting into slush. Pedestrians stepping carefully, eyes down. Sarah walked alone for a few blocks after leaving the office, needing the anonymity. She passed a construction site fenced off with plywood and faded notices. A woman stood nearby with a stroller arguing quietly with a man in a hard hat. Sarah stopped, watched, listened. This was the work. Not the filings, not the hearings, the lived aftermath. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. Sarah Miller, a voice said when she answered. Female, controlled. This is Linda Whitman. Sarah stopped walking. I won't take much of your time, Linda continued. I imagine you're very busy now. Sarah said nothing. I wanted to acknowledge something Linda said. You changed the trajectory of that night. That wasn't my intention, Sarah replied. Linda laughed softly. It never is. That's what makes it effective. A pause. Jonathan was always dangerous when he stopped caring how he was perceived. I just never thought he'd stop performing altogether. Sarah felt the old tension rise, but it didn't settle. Why are you calling? Because I underestimated you, Linda said. And because the room is changing. Sarah waited. There are people who will approach you now, Linda continued. They'll flatter. They'll offer. They'll pretend alignment. Don't mistake proximity for loyalty. Noted, Sarah said. Linda exhaled. For what it's worth, I'm stepping back from several boards, voluntarily. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I recognize a losing hand, Linda replied, and because I'm tired. The honesty surprised Sarah more than the call itself. Take care, Linda, she said. You too, Linda replied and hung up. That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, the one she had kept, even after her life expanded beyond it. The walls were familiar, the silence kind. She made tea, watched steam rise, let herself feel the exhaustion she had been postponing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jonathan. They finalized it, he said. The trust. Your seat. I know, Sarah replied. I accepted. I figured you would. She smiled. I added a clause. You always do. A pause settled between them. Not awkward, earned. What happens to you now? Sarah asked. Jonathan leaned back in his chair on the other end of the line, staring at a ceiling he had stared at many nights before. I stay visible, but not central. I mentor, I testify when needed, I stop pretending I'm neutral, and us. Jonathan hesitated. That depends on what you want us to be. Sarah looked around her apartment, the small table, the worn couch, the quiet proof of a life built piece by piece. I want honesty, she said. I want agency. I want time. Jonathan smiled, though she couldn't see it. That I can offer. They ended the call without ceremony. The next morning, Sarah walked into a room that had once excluded her and took her seat without apology. No speech, no announcement, just presence. Some people nodded. Some looked away. Some recalculated. Jonathan watched from the back, not interfering, not directing, just witnessing. The machinery of power did not stop. It never did. But it adjusted. And Sarah Miller, once invisible by design, sat within it now, not as a symbol, not as a concession, but as a variable that refused to be controlled. The story was no longer about how she entered the room. It was about what changed because she stayed. The room did not announce her. There was no introduction, no polite clearing of throats, no gesture inviting attention. Sarah Miller took her seat at the long table with the same quiet precision she once used to set down folded linen, and the absence of ceremony unsettled people more than applause ever could. She sat straight, hands relaxed, eyes forward. Across from her men and women who had spent decades mastering presence adjusted in their chairs. Some nodded once, acknowledging the inevitable. Others looked past her, already rehearsing how to frame her existence as temporary. A few watched carefully the way experienced players watch a new variable enter the system. Jonathan stood at the back of the room, exactly where he intended to be. He did not lean. He did not check his phone. He watched the way Sarah occupied space without claiming it, the way she listened without yielding. He felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with victory. The meeting moved forward. Language thick with qualifiers. Words like transition, oversight, alignment. Sarah listened. She took notes. When she spoke, it was brief and exact, not to impress, to clarify. The effect was cumulative. By the end, nothing had exploded. Nothing dramatic had happened, and that was precisely the point. Afterward, as people filed out in clusters, conversations shifted in her wake. Names were said differently now. Decisions hesitated where they once rushed. The machinery had not stopped, but its rhythm had changed. Outside, the city carried on indifferent and exacting. Sarah walked alone for several blocks before Jonathan caught up his stride, easy, unhurried. You didn't try to prove anything, he said. I didn't need to, she replied. The room already knew. They stopped at the edge of the river. The water moved steadily, unbothered by the skyline, watching itself reflected back. Sarah rested her hands on the railing, the cold metal grounding. You know, she said, I used to believe dignity was something you earned by being quiet. Jonathan leaned beside her. And now I think it's something you practice by refusing to disappear. He nodded. That took me longer to learn. They stood in silence, not empty, not expectant, just present. Weeks passed. The headlines softened, the outrage recalibrated. Attention drifted as it always did towards something louder, easier to digest. But underneath, changes held. Projects paused. Policies adjusted. Meetings included voices that had once been excluded by default. Sarah moved through it all without spectacle. She spoke when necessary. She declined what felt performative. She learned when to wait and when to push. There were days the weight pressed down hard when she returned home exhausted, the old urge to retreat, whispering its familiar comfort. On those days, she reminded herself that visibility was not a performance. It was a responsibility. Jonathan remained a presence at her side, not above, not behind. Sometimes he advised, sometimes he listened, sometimes he said nothing at all. Their relationship did not announce itself either. It evolved through shared work, shared restraint, shared understanding of what neither of them was willing to become again. One evening, as winter loosened its grip, Sarah stood alone in the ballroom where it had begun. The estate had been repurposed for a public forum. The chandeliers dimmed, the room rearranged to accommodate conversation rather than hierarchy. She watched people enter who would never have been invited before, watched them hesitate at the threshold, unsure if they belonged. She caught a woman's eye, older, nervous, carrying the weight of being unseen. Sarah nodded once. The woman stepped inside. From the back of the room, Jonathan observed the moment and felt a quiet certainty take hold. Not pride, not ownership, relief. The kind that comes when something fragile proves it can stand on its own. Later, as the evening wound down, Sarah found him near the exit. "Ready?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Always." They left together, the city opening around them, not welcoming, not hostile, just real. Sarah thought of the version of herself who had once cleaned rooms like that ballroom and never imagined speaking in one. She did not mourn her. She honored her. Every step, every silence, every decision had led here. The world had not changed because she entered it. It changed because she stayed. And if this story reminded you that dignity does not arrive with permission, that power shifts when ordinary people refuse to stay small, then like this story, subscribe for more and comment these 3 words. Stand your ground.